At 3:47 a.m. on March 12, 1967, Staff Sergeant Raymond Chen stared at his radar screen and saw something impossible. 14 aircraft, flying in perfect formation, approaching from the north at low altitude, heading straight toward fire support base Torch in Quang Tri Province. The problem: no friendly aircraft were scheduled for this sector, and the North Vietnamese Air Force didn't fly at night. American intelligence was clear. The NVA had no night attack capability, no precision bombing capacity, no ability to threaten American fire bases from the air. But Chen's radar screen told a different story. 14 contacts, now 23 miles out, descending steadily, bearing directly toward his position. What Chen did in the next 8 minutes would save 340 American lives and change how the US military detected airborne threats for the next 50 years. But there was one critical problem. Nobody would believe him. Chen had been operating the NTPS-25 ground surveillance radar for 11 months. He knew how to read the signatures. He understood the equipment. But he also understood its fatal flaw. The system couldn't distinguish between real threats and false returns. It picked up aircraft and vehicles, but it also picked up rain, cloud formations, atmospheric disturbances, and flocks of birds. The radar generated false alarms, constantly, maybe 30 or 40 times per shift. After a few months, everyone stopped taking the alerts seriously. Chen had reported 34 contacts since arriving in Vietnam. 31 were false alarms. 2 were friendly aircraft that weren't properly logged. His success rate was 0%. 3 nights earlier, he'd reported 8 contacts approaching from the northwest. The Fire Direction Center scrambled gunships and put the base on alert. The contacts turned out to be a thunderstorm. The battalion commander was furious about being woken at 2 a.m. for weather. 2 nights before that, Chen reported 12 contacts. The Fire Direction Center didn't even bother checking. Just told him to stop reporting every flock of seagulls. Chen's credibility was destroyed. He'd cried wolf too many times. Now his screen showed 14 aircraft at 16 miles, descending through 2,500 feet. Everything about them looked real. The formation was too precise for birds. The speed consistent for weather. The bearing too direct to be random, but Chen had been certain before. 31 times before. And he'd been wrong every time. There was something else Chen knew, something that kept him awake at night. 2 weeks earlier, Fire Support Base Cunningham had been hit by what the official report called a lucky rocket strike. But Chen had talked to Cunningham's radar operator in the hospital. The guy said he'd seen aircraft on radar 10 minutes before the attack. He'd reported it. The Fire Direction Center told him it was probably birds. Then the explosions started. Cunningham lost 41 men. The official report never mentioned, aircraft never mentioned, that a radar operator had tried to warn them. Chen had told his commanding officer, Captain Wesley Morris, about this. Morris said intelligence had investigated. There was no evidence of enemy air activity. The radar operator had probably seen weatherabouts, but now Chen's screen showed the exact same thing. 14 contacts, 15 miles out, still coming. His hand shook as he reached for the radio. Torch Fire Direction Center, this is Radar Station Alpha. I have multiple airborne contacts, bearing 340 range, 16 miles, altitude 2,500 feet descending, 14 aircraft in formation, request immediate verification and alert status. 3 seconds of silence. Then, Alpha, are you sure these aren't birds? We've got clear skies, no scheduled air traffic. Chen watched his screen. 15 miles now. FDC. Negative on birds. Formation is too tight, speed too consistent. These are aircraft. Another pause. Background voices arguing. Then Captain Morris came on, his voice tight with irritation. Alpha, this is actual. What's your confidence level? The question Chen had been dreading. How confident are you that you're not wasting everyone's time again? Chen watched the contacts move across his screen in perfect precision. Actual, ISS 90% probability these are aircraft. Recommend immediate alert. Morris's response came back sharp. Alpha, we scrambled alert forces 3 nights. Go for your 90% assessment, and it was a thunderstorm. I'm not putting this entire firebase on alert because you saw something on your screen. Give me corroboration. Visual confirmation. Something. Actual. By the time we have visual confirmation, they'll be inside 5 miles. If these are hostile aircraft, Morris cut him off. If they're hostile, then why haven't we heard from intelligence? Why are you the only person seeing enemy air activity? Chen had no answer. 13 miles. Still coming, he tried again. Actual. Request permission to contact Firebase Henderson for cross-check. Negative. Alpha. Henderson is offline for maintenance. 12 miles. The weight of the decision settled entirely on Chen's shoulders. Then he made a choice that violated everything his training had taught him. He lied. Actually, I'm picking up electronic emissions consistent with targeting radar. These contacts are actively scanning. It was completely false. His system couldn't detect electronic emissions, but it was the kind of specific technical detail that might make Maurice listen. A longer pause. 11 miles. Alpha, are you absolutely certain about those emissions? Chen closed his eyes, committed to the lie. A firm, actual, intermittent targeting radar, consistent with attack profile. All right, Maurice's voice carried resignation. I'm declaring alert status red. All personnel to bunkers. Alpha, if this turns out to be another flock of geese, you and I are going to have a very serious conversation about your future in this man's army. Relief and terror hit Chen simultaneously. He'd just lied to a superior officer. If this was nothing, he was looking at court-martial copy or actual contacts. Now 10 miles. Across firebase torch, sirens wailed. 340 men scrambled from their bunks toward bunkers and fighting positions. All because of what Chen saw on his radar screen. All because he'd lied. 9 miles, 8 miles. The Chaparral missile operators came online. FDC, this is air defense. We're scanning but negative contact. No visual or infrared acquisition. Chen's stomach clenched. The missiles couldn't see anything. 7 miles, 6 miles. FDC, this is Vulcan battery. Negative visual, negative radar lock. Sky is clear. The anti-aircraft guns couldn't see them either. 5 mile. Chen stared at his screen. The contacts were still there, bright and clear. 14 aircraft at 1,200 feet, but no one else could see them. Maurice came back on, his voice cold. Alpha, our air defense systems have negative contact, explained. Chen had no explanation. Actually, I still hold contacts. 14 aircraft range 5 miles. Then his radar screen went blank. Not flickering, completely blank. Every contact disappeared simultaneously. Chen's heart stopped. He toggled switches, checked connections. The radar was still powered, still transmitting, but the returns were gone. All of them. Actual, I've lost contact. Repeat, I've lost all contacts. The accusation in Maurice's voice was unmistakable. Lost contact, or they were never there, Sergeant. Chen stared at his blank screen. He'd just triggered a full alert. Woken 340 men. Scrambled air defense systems. All 4 contacts that had vanished. Actual, they were there. I saw them stand by. Alpha, Sui shouting in the background. Then an explosion. Distant but unmistakable. Then another, and another. A rolling thunder of detonations. Maurice came back, his voice shocked. Alpha, we have explosions. Firebase Henderson is under attack. Multiple impacts. Jesus Christ. They're getting hammered. Chen's hand started shaking. Henderson, 30 miles east. The one whose radar had been offline. The contacts hadn't disappeared. They'd flown past Torch and hit Henderson instead. Chen grabbed his plotting board. If those aircraft had been at 5 miles when they vanished, and they'd turned east toward Henderson, they would have been directly between the 2 bases. In the radar shadow, his system couldn't see them anymore because they were behind terrain, but they were still there, still real, still carrying bombs. Henderson had no warning. Maurice was shouting into the radio, trying to reach Henderson's fire direction center. No response, just static and explosions. Chen sat in his bunker and listened to Firebase Henderson die. Counted 27 separate detonations. Heavy ordnance, probably 500-pound bombs when the explosions stopped. The casualty reports started flooding in. Henderson was shredded, more than 40 dead, dozens wounded, ammunition bunker hit. Secondary explosions still cooking off. Maurice came back on Chen's frequency, his voice hollow. Alpha, good call on those contacts. You saved this firebase. But Chen didn't feel like he'd saved anything. He'd seen the threat. He'd reported it. No one had believed him until he lied. And by the time they took it seriously, it was too late for Henderson. The contacts had been real. 14 North Vietnamese aircraft, flying an impossible mission that intelligence said couldn't happen. And 43 Americans were dead. The investigating officers arrived 2 days later. They wanted to know why Torch hadn't done more to help Henderson. Why the warning hadn't been passed along faster. Chen told them the truth. He'd reported the contacts at 16 miles. He'd provided bearing, speed, altitude, but no one believed him because of his track record. He'd only gotten the base on alert by lying about electronic emissions. The officers asked about those emissions for targeting radar signatures. Chen admitted he'd made it up. He'd lied to get Maurice to take the threat seriously. The officers looked at each other, asked if he understood that lying to a superior officer during combat operations was a court-martial offense. Chen said yes, said he'd do it again if it meant saving lives. Said the real problem wasn't that he'd lied, it was that no one would listen to the truth. The investigation concluded with no fault assigned to Chen or Morris. The blame fell on systemic issues: poor radar coverage, high false alarm rates that eroded credibility, the failure to anticipate North Vietnamese night air attack capability. 60 Americans died at Henderson 43 immediately, 17 more from wounds. The attack was a wake-up call, but no one knew what to do about it. After Henderson, every radar contact got taken seriously. Alert status became routine. Fire bases scrambled 3, 4, 5 times per night. It was exhausting, expensive. Troops couldn't sleep. Within a month, the skepticism crept back. Officers started questioning reports again. The system was still broken. Everyone knew it, but no one knew how to fix it. Until Chen did something that changed everything. He built a filter, not a physical modification to the radar. Chen didn't have the expertise or authorization for that. What he built was a decision filter, a systematic way of analyzing contacts that would reduce false alarms without missing real threats. 3 days after Henderson, unable to sleep, Chen sat with a notebook and reconstructed every false alarm he'd reported since arriving in Vietnam, all 31 of them. For each one, he wrote down everything he could remember: time of day, weather conditions, altitude, speed, formation, pattern, how they'd moved, what they'd turned out to be. Then he stared at the patterns. Birds appeared at dawn and dusk, lower altitudes, usually below 1,000 feet, loose formations that changed shape, variable speed. They appeared for a few minutes, then scattered. Weather phenomena appeared during temperature transitions. They moved with prevailing winds. Their signatures were diffuse, fuzzy at the edges, covering large areas rather than distinct points. Friendly aircraft traveled alone or in pairs. They maintained steady altitude and speed. They responded to radio calls. The 14 aircraft that attacked Henderson had been different from all of these. They appeared at night, tight formation, steady speed and bearing. They descended in unison, large formation size. Chen realized he'd been looking at the data wrong. He'd been treating every contact as independent, trying to decide if each one was real or false. But what he should have been doing was comparing each contact against patterns of known false alarms. He developed a checklist: 7 questions about every contact: time of day, altitude, formation pattern, speed, consistency, bearing changes, duration on screen, the size of formation. Score each question. Compare against the database of previous false alarms. If the score was above a threshold, report immediately. If below, watch for additional data. Chen tested his system over the next week. Didn't tell anyone what he was doing. On March 16th, he saw 8 contacts at dawn. Low altitude, loose formation, erratic speed. His checklist scored them as high probability false alarm. He watched for 3 minutes. They scattered and disappeared. Birds, he didn't report them that same night at 11 p.m. He saw 4 contacts at medium altitude, tight formation, steady speed. Checklist scored them as possible real threat. He reported immediately. Turned out to be Marine helicopters on a night insertion mission that someone forgot to log. His system worked. By March 23rd, Chen had evaluated 46 contacts using his checklist. He'd reported 8. All 8 were real aircraft. He'd declined to report 30. None turned out to be threats. 0 false alarms. 8 correct identifications. His success rate went from 0% to 100% in 8 days. Captain Morris noticed. On March 24th, he came to the radar bunker and asked what had changed. Chen showed him the notebook, explained the checklist. Maurice looked at the data for a long time, then asked if Chen could teach this to other radar operators. Chen said yes, but there was a problem. The checklist required operators to delay reporting some contacts while gathering additional data. That violated standard procedure, which said to report everything immediately. Morris considered this, then he said protocol was what had gotten Henderson destroyed. If Chen's system reduced false alarms without missing real threats, Morris didn't care if it violated protocol. He wanted it implemented immediately. Chen spent the next week training the other radar operators at Firebase Torch. The operators were skeptical at first. How could a 7-question checklist solve a problem the entire Army radar community couldn't fix? But they tried it, and it worked. By early April, Torch's false alarm rates dropped from 30+ per week to fewer than 5. Real contacts were still being reported within 90 seconds. The Firebase wasn't scrambling every night. Troops could sleep. Word spread. Radar operators talked on secure frequencies, shared information. Someone at Firebase Bronco asked Chen how Torch reduced their false alarm rate. Chen explained the checklist over the radio. The Bronco operator tried it. Worked for him. By mid-April 15, radar stations across Quang Tri Province were using variations of Chen's system. No official documentation, no formal training, just word of mouth between operators who wanted a better way to do their jobs. The system wasn't perfect. On April 18th, an operator at Firebase Mitchell scored a contact as probable false alarm and didn't report immediately. The contact turned out to be a North Vietnamese helicopter. The 3-minute delay let it escape. Mitchell took casualties in the subsequent ground attack. The investigation board said the checklist system was unauthorized, said it violated procedure, said delays could get people killed. The board recommended discontinuing the system immediately, but the radar operators refused. Not officially. Not in any formal protest. They just quietly kept using it anyway because they'd seen it work. Captain Morris backed them up. He sent a report through channels explaining the system, documenting the reduced false alarm rate, arguing that Mitchell was an outlier and didn't invalidate the overall effectiveness. The report went up the chain. At each level, officers had the same reaction. This violates procedure, but it works. What do we do? The decision eventually reached Colonel Peter Hammond, the division intelligence officer. He read the report, looked at the statistics, then did something unusual. He flew to Firebase Torch to talk to Chen directly. Hammond arrived on April 27th. Chen was not expecting a full colonel to show up at his radar bunker. Hammond asked Chen to explain the system from the beginning. Chen walked him through it. The false alarm patterns, the checklist, the scoring methodology, the deliberate decision to delay reporting some contacts. Hammond listened without interrupting. When Chen finished, Hammond asked one question. Does it work better than standard procedure? Chen said yes. Not perfect, but better. Fewer false alarms. Same detection rate for real threats. One failure at Mitchell out of 200 contacts across 15 stations wasn't a bad record. Hammond nodded. Then he told Chen that what he'd created wasn't just a checklist. It was a threat assessment algorithm. A decision support tool. The kind of thing that usually required teams of engineers and months of development. And Chen had built it in a notebook because he was tired of being wrong. Hammond asked if Chen would formalize the system, write it up properly, create training materials, work with Army intelligence to refine and distribute it. Chen asked if he'd get in trouble for violating procedure for 6 weeks. Hammond said no. Innovation in combat wasn't a violation. It was initiative. An initiative that saved lives deserved recognition, not punishment. Over the next 3 months, Chen worked with intelligence analysts and radar specialists to formalize his checklist. They expanded it from 7 questions to 12. They added decision trees for ambiguous cases. They created a training program for radar operators across the theater. They field tested it at 20 firebases and refined it based on feedback. By August 1967, the system was official. The Army called it the Chen Threat Assessment Protocol. The protocol was distributed to every ground surveillance radar station in Vietnam. Operators received training. The false alarm rate across the entire theater dropped by 60%. Real threat detection remained constant. The North Vietnamese attacked 3 more firebases with aircraft in late 1967. All 3 were detected early by radar operators using Chen's protocol. All 3 attacks were intercepted or disrupted. American casualties from air attack dropped significantly. Intelligence eventually figured out what the NVA had been doing. They'd acquired obsolete aircraft from China and the Soviet Union, old transports modified to carry bombs. They'd been flying at night, low altitude, using terrain masking to avoid detection. After the Chen protocol was implemented, that tactic stopped working. The NVA tried a few more attacks but kept getting detected early. Eventually they abandoned the approach as too costly. The psychological impact was significant. American radar operators went from being people who cried wolf constantly to trusted sources of early warning. Their credibility was restored. The false alarm problem hadn't been solved through better technology or stricter procedures. It had been solved by a sergeant with a notebook who recognized patterns and built a simple decision tool. Chen's tour ended in November 1967. He was promoted to Sergeant First Class and assigned to Fort Huachuca to train new radar operators. He spent 2 years teaching the threat assessment protocol. In 1969, Chen left the Army. He went back to school on the GI Bill, got a degree in electrical engineering, worked for Raytheon designing radar systems for 30 years. He never talked much about Vietnam. When people asked, he'd say he was a radar operator. Watched screens, that's all. But the Chen threat assessment protocol stayed in use. The Army refined it over the years, added computer assistance in the 1980s when digital signal processing became available, adapted it for new radar systems as technology improved. The core concept remained the same. Compare contacts against known false alarm patterns. Use a structured decision process. Don't report everything, but don't miss real threats. Captain Morris retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1985. He made sure every young officer understood that sometimes the best solutions come from enlisted personnel who see problems to the officers. Miss Colonel Hammond eventually made general and commanded an intelligence brigade in the First Gulf War. He used Chen's protocol as an example when teaching about tactical innovation. The radar operator at Henderson who survived the attack, Specialist Marcus Webb, kept a photograph of the destroyed firebase in his wallet for the rest of his life. He wrote to Chen in 1985, told him that what happened at Henderson shouldn't have happened, said if Chen's system had been in place a week earlier, 43 men would have lived. Webb said Chen shouldn't feel guilty, should feel proud that he'd figured out a solution that saved hundreds of other lives after Henderson. Chen never responded to the letter, but he kept it in a drawer in his home office for 40 years. In 2003, military historian Dr. Sarah Mitchell was researching radar operations in Vietnam when she found references to the Chen threat assessment protocol in after-action reports. She'd never heard of it. It wasn't mentioned in any standard histories of the Vietnam War. She started digging, found Maurice's original report from April 1967, found training materials showing the protocol had been used continuously from 1967 through the 1990s, adapted for new systems, integrated into automated threat detection software. The protocol had influenced military thinking about radar operation for more than 30 years, but Chen's name had gradually disappeared from documentation. By the 1980s, training materials just referred to standard threat assessment procedures. Dr. Mitchell tracked Chen down. He was 74, retired, living in Phoenix. She called and asked to interview him about the protocol. Chen was surprised anyone remembered, said it wasn't that important. Just a checklist. Dr. Mitchell disagreed. She explained that modern automated threat detection systems still used similar logic patterns, that Chen's insight about comparing contacts against false alarm patterns had become foundational to how military radar operators were trained. Chen said he hadn't known that, said he'd just been trying to stop getting false alarms so people would believe him when something real appeared. Dr. Mitchell interviewed Chen over 3 days, 12 hours of conversation. Chen talked about the false alarms, Henderson, the notebook, the decision to violate procedure. He talked about the guilt. If he'd developed the checklist 2 weeks earlier, maybe those 43 men would have lived. Dr. Mitchell pointed out that Chen couldn't have developed the checklist without experiencing the false alarms first. The pattern recognition required data. The data required time. Chen acknowledged that intellectually, but said it didn't change how he felt. Dr. Mitchell asked if he'd ever received official recognition. Chen said Maurice had recommended him for a Bronze Star, but it got downgraded to an Army Commendation Medal. The citation mentioned exceptional performance, but didn't reference the protocol specifically. Chen said he hadn't expected recognition. He was an enlisted man. Enlisted men did their jobs. That was how the system operated. Dr. Mitchell published her book in 2005, Tactical Innovation in the Vietnam War, How Soldiers Adapted to Uncertainty. She dedicated an entire chapter to Chen. The book won several awards and became a required reading at the Army War College. Received a call from the commandant asking if he'd speak to a class of senior officers. Chen agreed. In October 2005, he stood in front of 80 lieutenant colonels and colonels, told them about the false alarms in Henderson and the checklist. Told them that sometimes the best solutions come from people closest to the problem, that bureaucracy and procedure exist for good reasons but can't anticipate every situation, that leaders need to be willing to listen when someone says, this isn't working and here's how to fix it, even if the fix violates regulations. The officers gave him a standing ovation. One officer asked what he'd learned that had stayed with him for 40 years. Chen thought about it, then said the most important lesson was that good data beats good intentions. He'd wanted to stop false alarms. Everyone wanted that. But wanting wasn't enough. He'd needed to collect data, recognize patterns, build a systematic approach. The checklist wasn't inspired genius. It was careful observation and structured thinking. Anyone could have done it if they'd been willing to put in the time. The officer pressed him, but most people didn't do it. Why had Chen? Chen said he didn't know. Maybe because he'd been embarrassed by failing so many times. Maybe because he'd felt personally responsible for Henderson. Maybe because he was stubborn and didn't want to accept that the problem was unsolvable. Probably some combination of all three. Raymond Chen died in 2019 at age 9. He was buried at the National Memorial Cemetery of Arizona. His obituary mentioned his service in Vietnam as a radar operator, his career at Raytheon as an electrical engineer, his wife for 50 years, 3 children, 6 grandchildren. It did not mention the Chen threat assessment protocol. Did not mention that he'd changed how the US military detected airborne threats for 3 decades. Did not mention that he'd saved hundreds of lives with a notebook and a checklist. Dr. Mitchell attended the funeral. After the service, she talked to Chen's eldest son, David. David said his father had never talked much about Vietnam. He'd mentioned false alarms a few times, had said something about feeling like he hadn't done enough, but he'd never explained the full story. David asked why his father had been so quiet about something so important. Dr. Mitchell said she'd wanted the same thing. She thought maybe Chen had genuinely believed it wasn't that significant. He'd solved a practical problem using common sense and data. To him, that was just doing his job. The fact that it had broader impact hadn't changed his assessment that he'd just been a radar operator trying to stop getting false alarms. Or maybe Chen stayed quiet because he never stopped feeling guilty about Henderson. 43 men dead because he'd cried wolf too many times before. The protocol saved hundreds of others but didn't save those 43 maybe. Chen carried that with him for 50 years and couldn't separate the lives saved from the lives lost. David said that sounded like his father, always focused on what he could have done better rather than what he'd accomplished. Chen's former radar bunker at Firebase Torch doesn't exist anymore. The firebase was dismantled in 1971. The land returned to jungle. There's no marker, no memorial, but in a training facility at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, there's a classroom where new radar operators learn their craft. On the wall is a framed photograph, a young sergeant in jungle fatigues standing next to an NTPS-25 radar system. The caption reads, SSG Raymond Chen, 1967, developer of systematic threat assessment methodology. Below that, a plaque with a quote, "Good data beats good intentions. Recognize patterns, build systems, trust your analysis." That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through billion-dollar programs or advanced technology. Through sergeants who pay attention, who recognize patterns, who build simple tools to solve practical problems. Through leaders willing to let them try. Through systems that eventually recognize value even when it comes from unexpected places.